Thank you, Geoff, for that fairly underwhelming introduction. I first joined Intuiface back in 2012, and since that time I've run hundreds of demos. What I can tell you is that when I first joined the company, something we realized was that until people actually saw the software in action, they really didn't understand what it did. We would tell them it's no code, drag and drop, WYSIWYG, stuff like this, but every software says they're easy. Every software says anybody can do it. But when you actually see Intuiface, when our prospects actually saw it, their reaction was, ooh, that really is impressive. So the purpose of this session is to give you an ooh. Hashtag get the ooh. I'm going to run you through the creation of a basic Intuiface experience. I'll show you that in a moment. The goal is to show you the basics in action. I'm a moderately competent Intuiface user. I'm not some expert, but we're going to build something visually cool fairly rapidly. This is really for the true novices. If you've used Intuiface a lot, maybe you're grabbing a coffee and kicking back. But if you're really new to Intuiface, I like this demo because it fairly quickly shows you how you can put together a tight, good-looking experience with a nice level of interactivity with a very modest amount of effort. On my screen right now is one of the experiences in our marketplace, the Intuiface Marketplace. This one is called the Steelframes collection. It's a photo gallery, and you can download it for free. It's in the marketplace. What we're going to do is build this scene with just a couple of the galleries. We're going to start with nature, and if you go to the nature gallery, there'll be this acid flow of images we can move through, and we can pop out a copy if we want. The Steelframes logo in the upper left will send us back to the home screen. Then we'll head over to vintage and open up the vintage scene. Behind the scenes, these images are being fed from a spreadsheet. So this is not just some basic drag and drop. We're throwing in a spreadsheet. Notice, by the way, it auto scrolls. We're not going to put those little wordy things on the bottom. We'll do that another time. Click Steelframes in the upper left. We're back. So the goal is to build that thing moderately quickly so you guys understand how easy it is to work with Intuiface to create something fairly professional looking. And again, I'm no professional, so this should be a good test. I'm going to clean up my work right now. We're going to do a little bit of a fade, and then we're going to get going. By starting with a look at the Intuiface Marketecture, I thought it might be valuable to give you a brief overview of the Intuiface family. Again, this session, the first session of the user conference, is really directed towards those that are very new to Intuiface. Maybe you just started your evaluation, you checked out our website a little bit. I like this diagram. You can find this on the overview page. We call it our Marketecture. It's a great basic look at the components of the Intuiface family, how they all fit together, and what you'd be doing with each one of those. So let me walk through this a little bit. Starting on the left here, you see Composer. That's the editor, the tool you'll use to create your interactive content, the tool I'm going to use in this demo to show you how to build a cool little experience. It runs on Windows. It only runs on Windows. So if you are a Mac shop, congrats, but you first have to run Windows on the Mac before you can run Composer on the Mac. But about 15% of our install base does that. It's a what you see is what you get editor. As you'll see in my demonstration, it's a drag and droppy kind of thing. Even though I know everybody says it, you're going to see what I mean for Intuiface. You're taking your images, your videos, your documents, your 3D models, etc. It's your design, it's your storyboard, it's your layout. You control every single pixel of the design. So that's Composer on the left. On the right of the diagram, you have Player. Player is the runtime. It's the tool you will use to run the content you create in Composer. Player runs on 7 different platforms. You can see that on the right here. It runs on Windows like Composer, but Player also runs on Android, on the Brightside Media Player platform. It runs on Samsung Tizen-based devices. That's a smart signage platform. It runs on LG WebOS smart displays. It runs on the iPad. And it runs on Chrome OS devices. So you're building in Composer on Windows. You're running in Player on any of those 7 different platforms. Player looks the same. It acts the same. Frankly, there's nothing to even really demo because it looks the same. Its job is just to run stuff. Really, the only difference is how you install Player, and that depends on the platform. It has nothing to do with Intuiface. It's just the way you provision a Brightside box is different from the way you install an app on the iPad from the App Store. So you're building in Composer, you're running on Player. You may have only one Composer seat, but hundreds of players because you have 100 devices in the world playing all your cool stuff. In the middle is a cloud-hosted infrastructure comprised of additional capability available to you if you choose to use them. Composer can be offline, Player can be offline. They don't have to be online, that's your choice. And we have customers working in air-gapped environments, maybe it's a government institution, and that's perfectly okay. But for most of our customers, yes, there's some security in place, there's firewalls and that sort of thing, but there is some level of network connectivity, which enables us to offer things like sharing and deployment, as you see on the left of the cloud. Sharing is collaboration that could be with clients. You're previewing work for some project you're building for those clients. It could be internal clients, right? Just your boss or some internal stakeholder. Sharing could also be collaboration with other designers. It's not just you building something. There are other designers using Composer. You want to share your work with these other groups so they can maybe contribute some of their own design expertise or just to help you move things along. Deploy is about remote deployment, that classic digital signage capability, enabling you to take your experiences and publish them, deploy them to players anywhere in the world. You can be home in your pajamas. It's perfectly fine. And it could be any number of players. So really convenient. But of course, you have to be online. If you're not online, there's no possible way we can do remote deployment. Analytics also lives in the cloud. You can see that on the right side of the cloud diagram here. The idea is this. The beauty of interactivity is you actually have something to measure. I'll be talking about analytics tomorrow in another session. The challenge of traditional digital signage is there's nothing to measure, right? What are you going to measure with traditional broadcast digital signage? There are secondary measures, but correlation is not causation, right? So you don't really know what's working. You don't really know what's effective. With interactivity, you do. You don't just know what they did, but if there's a camera, you know their age and gender. If you have connectivity to the cloud, you might know the weather outside and the sports score. You may very well know which screen and which score and which floor and which time of year. You know all of this stuff. You can collect all of this data. You pick the events, you pick the data you want to collect about those events, and each individual player running those experiences, independently collecting data and uploading it to what we call the data hub. That's that thing you see in the cloud. It's the job of the data hub to collate all this data and make it available for analysis. Now you can choose to export that data. That's what this forward data thing is. If you have an existing analytics platform, if you know what you're doing and prefer to use some third-party thing, great, you can export it. Let's be honest, most of us don't know how to do analytics. Let's be honest, in the digital signage industry, because there was nothing to measure, we didn't really build skills around analytics, right? There was a big complacency and thus a loss of competence. So what we did is not just enable you to collect data, but to also build charts and dashboards. This isn't just about data collection. There's a charts and dashboards feature built into Intuiface. See you tomorrow for my analytics session. All of this stuff lives in the cloud, and good news, Intuiface, unique in the digital signage industry, is ISO 27001 certified. That's the information security standard produced by the ISO organization. We're the only one that has it. What does it mean? It means we can guarantee your information is secure. It's really good for us selfishly because we'll get a 7-page RFI from an IT organization. We give them our certificate and we're done. So it's really good for us. And if you're an agency or an integrator, you sort of inherit our certification by using our platform. The bottom third of this diagram represents Intuiface's ability to communicate with external data sources, business logic, and devices. You are not limited to the stuff you have at your disposal when you're building something, when you're designing it. You can essentially create templates, Intuiface experiences that are populated with information at runtime in context. In fact, it's a read from and a write to. You could be reading from the cloud, you can be writing to the cloud. Heck, you can talk to the Nest thermostat if you really want to. The beauty of API Explorer in the bottom left is it automatically creates integrations with any web API. Web APIs are everywhere. Pretty much any service you use on the web has a web API. Any back office system probably has a web API, which means Intuiface can pretty much talk to anything. And again, it's read from, right to, we have people building endless aisle retail kiosks using Intuiface because we can communicate with the, for example, back office ERP application and communicate with Stripe to make sure the payment was processed. You can do all of this with Intuiface. It's way more than PowerPoint with touch. It's pretty cool. In this bottom little graphic here, you'll notice there's other ways Intuiface can communicate with something outside the running experience. For example, we can work with other applications, could be .NET DLLs or JavaScript apps. So there are other ways to interface with things. All of this stuff is documented online. We don't sell services. That's not our business. We want to empower you to do the job. We can help you, of course, and we have a great support organization, but that's entirely up to you. So Intuiface can connect to all of these external data sources, business logic devices, bringing in all this information to ensure that what you're showing on screen is right in that moment, at that time. You're not showing what you had 6 weeks ago when you designed it. This is big picture Intuiface. Thank you for the ride. Now let's go build that experience. Okay, I've reset my experience. We have a blank slate. We're now going to create the Steelframes collection from scratch. I have a bunch of notes here to help me build it all together. We're going to start by grabbing an image and moving it into the background. So on another screen, I got a file explorer window with a whole bunch of media inside it. I'm grabbing an image called background. You can see that that looks like a background, so we named it very well. In Intuiface, there's lots of different ways to do things. I want this image to be the background of my experience. In fact, even though experiences are comprised of multiple scenes and each scene can have its own individual background, I'm going to choose to make this my experience background. So right click, set as experience background, and then it says, should the scene be invisible? Because if the scene itself is visible, you can't see the experience background. So yes, I want my scene to be invisible. I want to see through the scene to the experience background. And now we have the brick wall from the Steelframes collection. Next, we need to add a text asset that says what the heck this is. So I'm dragging a text asset in from the Assets panel. On the upper right, we're going to call this the Steelframes collection. I can't see it because it's black on black. That's not very helpful. So now we have white on black. And I wrote down that I want this to be something called Portico Rough Regular. Good. And a font size of 90. I've built this already. I have all these presets in mind. So let me make this a little bit bigger so everything fits in one row. That looks pretty nice. We'll move it up here a little bit. See the x-axis in the upper right-hand corner? I want to center this thing. Sort of a quick and dirty way of centering is just half the width. This is a 1920 width experience, so 960 is half of 1920, 960 on the x-axis, and we're actually centered right there. So we have the Steelframes collection. Now, if you remember, there was a button in the upper left-hand side, which was the logo of the Steelframes collection. And as I said, we're going to put two buttons here, one for the Nature collection, one for the Vintage collection. Let's start with that logo that goes in the upper right-hand corner. Here it is, kind of big. We'll shrink it. There we go. That's pretty easy. Then we want two buttons. We've got great graphic designers. They built these buttons. I can't build buttons in Photoshop. So I have two images here, dragging in from File Explorer. You can see them here. There's Vintage and Nature. Let me put Nature over here, Vintage over here. Now these are kind of big. Let me highlight both of them, and I know I want these buttons to be 530 wide by 420. That's about right, and I'll move these, separate them a little bit. And these little blue lines are alignment lines. They make sure everything is kind of centered on each other. I think that's pretty good and pretty quick. So now we have a title, we have two buttons, we have the Steelframes logo in the upper left-hand corner. We now need to create the nature scene, right? We need to create the scene with the images. I'm going to open up the Scenes panel. Let's rename this to Home. So Scene 1 isn't a very good name. We'll rename it to Home, right-click it, and duplicate it. So we've created a copy of Home. I'll right-click this and call this Nature because that's what it's going to be. So this is going to be the Nature collection. I can't call it Steelframes collection. I have to call it the Nature collection. So I can change that in the Properties panel in the upper right. There's Nature collection. And as I recall, I wanted to use a slightly different font just because I can. which is Portico regular. That looks pretty good. Not centered. Upper right-hand corner again, x-axis value, 960. Quick way to center. I don't want the buttons. I'm getting rid of the buttons. What I want to have for the nature collection is a bunch of nature photos. So I'm going to head on down to File Explorer. Check it out. In File Explorer, I got a bunch of images here from my nature collection. So all I'm doing is dragging them into my experience, and they're copied in. I guess I could have an image wall, right, and just a bunch of random images, but that's not very professional looking. I want to have that cool kind of asset flow. Right now, we just have a wall of images. I need to create that cool visual effect, that asset flow effect. Let me right-click these images and add them into a group. If you multi-select a bunch of items in Intuiface, then you can always right-click that multi-select bunch of stuff and stick them into a group. A group is a kind of collection. It's a little like a group in PowerPoint. It is not the kind of collection I want to have here. I want to have that flowy thing, right? So upper right-hand corner, Properties panel, there's a style drop-down. Every time you have collections, you can change the style. I'm changing the style to an asset flow. So here's my asset flow. It's not very visually appealing right now, but it does now give you a sense we're kind of getting to where we need to go. So let me play with this a little bit. I'm going to tweak the properties on the right. Again, I've built this before. I know the right properties to set to make it look visually appealing. Certainly if you're building this from scratch, you might need to work out the values a little bit to figure it out. But I know what I want to do. On the right, I want to put the fourth item in focus, not the first item. The aperture width needs to be 390 because I think that looks good. The wingspan would be 1. The expansion factor is 0.9. And really importantly, the images have to be bigger, which turns out to be 765 by 608. That just kind of looks nice. Finally, upper right-hand corner, the width, we'll make it the width of the screen. I can squash this down. Whoops, I don't want to rotate it. I want to squash it down, drop it on the bottom of my experience. We've got these little arrows here. Right side, show controls gone. I have my asset flow collection. One last thing I'll do on the right in the properties panel, very bottom, tap item to open. Do you remember how I tapped something and it opened up? Remember that? So tap item to open, and that's all I got to do to make that happen. So from now on, if I play this experience and navigate to the nature collection, then when I scroll through the asset flow and tap something, an item will pop out. Remember, I need to go back to the table of contents. The way we did that is we tapped the Steelframes logo in the upper left-hand corner. Let's do that. Let's arm that logo with a trigger action pair. I'm selecting the logo in the upper left, right-clicking, and let's add a trigger. When that logo is tapped, then do something. When then, this is the trigger action principle you might have heard about in Intuiface. Trigger is the event. Action are the things that happen as a result of the event. In this case, when the image is tapped, then scene-to-scene navigation, go to the scene named Home. We called it Home. With a transition effect of crossfade, it didn't have to be. There are hundreds of triggers in Intuiface. There are hundreds of actions in Intuiface. I could have used an image in the upper left-hand corner. It could have been a button. It could have been videos. Anything could initiate a scene-to-scene navigation action. Any trigger can call any action. I want to use the image to do that. So when that image is pressed and released, then it will navigate back to the home scene. That feels pretty good. I think this scene is done, right? Let's duplicate this scene. Duplicate. Nice. Now we're on a new scene. This is going to be the vintage scene. We'll rename this to vintage. Okay. Got to get rid of this. Those are the wrong pictures now, right? First, we'll rename this. This is to be the vintage collection. And I think we wanted this to be Portico Vintage. So Portico Vintage. Why not? Right? And then we'll do the old centering thing. 960. There we go. So on this scene, we're not just going to drag in some images. We're going to work from a spreadsheet. We actually have a spreadsheet in File Explorer. Right here, this spreadsheet references, we can open it up. The spreadsheet contains the name of the artwork, the artist, the price, and a reference to the image representing that particular artwork. Think of it as a path to the image. These are the images referred to in the spreadsheet. There's a one-to-one correspondence. So watch this. Is everybody sitting down? Because this is going to be pretty dramatic. Drag in the spreadsheet, and it says, oh, you want to add a spreadsheet. Did you know that the stuff referenced in the spreadsheet are available? I can grab that stuff for you. Are you okay with that? Should I import the reference files? Why, yes, you should import the reference files. And here it is. For every row in the spreadsheet, there's an individual item in this, looks like an asset grid. It's not an asset flow, it's an asset grid. There's actually more in here than you realize. Let me highlight. It turns out there's 3 elements and an image. You can't see the elements because it's black font on a black background. So I've highlighted those elements, making them white, and oh, look what's tucked away. Basically what's happened is every column in the spreadsheet is treated like a property. Every row is a different item. So for every item, show the value of every property. Artwork name, artist, price, image. How cool is that? By the way, it doesn't have to be an Excel spreadsheet. The exact same principle applies to any data source external to Intuiface. Anything accessible through a web API, for example, can be a dynamic data source used to populate collections in your experience. It doesn't have to be the spreadsheet. I'm using a spreadsheet because it's easy, and I'm not a very competent Intuiface user. So I'm using Excel. I have the ability to reorganize this template. This is a template. Check it out. I'm changing every single instance of this collection fed by the spreadsheet. Now, I'm not going to keep these 3 things, 1, 2, 3. For this particular example, I'm going to get rid of them, but you get the idea that I can create any design I want. I can use any font. I can do any size. I can resize them, move them around. I have all of this opportunity to customize it. I'm getting rid of that right now. I'm just going to focus on the image itself. So let me get the image in this box, and I want to make it look pretty. So let's resize this. That looks pretty nice to me, I think. I'm giving it like a little bit of a border, like a frame border. Okay, so now we can treat it like any other collection. The data's coming from outside Intuiface, but we can treat it as if it were natively inside Intuiface. So I need to do stuff to this, like change it to an asset flow. Okay, data's coming in dynamically, but now we're going to treat it like an asset flow. Let's do the same thing we did last time. So on the right side, I'm playing with properties. An index of 4. We have an aperture of 390, a wingspan of 1, an expansion factor of 0.9. The width and height, of course, need to be played with, 765, 600. That looks pretty good. I'm expanding it to the width, and we'll go a little bigger here, and there we go. So we have fed from the spreadsheet all of the images referenced inside that spreadsheet, still presented as an asset flow. That's a little off to the side, isn't it? Still presented as an asset flow. You'd never know the data was coming from outside Intuiface. It's acting as if it's native to Intuiface, but it's not. One last thing, remember there was an auto scroll. Do you remember that? So it was sort of advancing on its own. It's actually pretty easy to do. Look on the right-hand side under behavior. So this is the behavior property category on the right-hand side. Auto scroll. Isn't that nice? And what we can say is, we'll just do some 5s here. 5 seconds after it enters, it starts. If there's an interaction, it waits 5 seconds, we'll say, before it starts again. And it will show items for 5 seconds. So it'll start auto-scrolling 5 seconds after we get to the scene. If I interact with the asset flow, it waits 5 seconds before it starts again. And it will display an item for 5 seconds. Pretty simple, right? So now you have a way to build playlists. This could be a set of images, videos, documents, 3D models. It could be a whole combination of stuff. And you can easily create your own automated little playlist that works as expected. Because I duplicated this scene, this logo in the upper right-hand corner should already contain the trigger action pair pointing back to the home scene. And let's see, if you look on the right-hand side, that's the list of trigger action pairs associated with the selected item. And yep, it already says if the Steelframes logo is tapped, then go home. That's pretty cool. I have just one more thing to do, which is to tell these things where to go, right? This initiates the visit to my photo gallery. When nature is tapped, it should go to the nature scene. When vintage is tapped, it should go to the vintage scene. Let me right-click the nature image, add a trigger. When that image is tapped, then scene-to-scene navigation, go to the scene named nature. Great. And for vintage, we can add a trigger, which is to navigate to the scene named vintage. And I hate to say it, but we're done. Let's try it out. Play. 1, 2, good. So here's my Steelframes collection. Let's visit the nature scene. And there's my acid flow. These are images I added directly into my experience. Remember, tap item to open, tap item to open. So now I have an image that's been popped out. Let's go back to the main menu. I'm interested in visiting the vintage collection. So I'm clicking Steelframes. Back to the main scene. There's my vintage button. Let's go check it out. Click. Now we're on the vintage scene. Under the covers, I left the arrows on there. We could have taken it off. Under the covers, this is Excel. There's my auto scroll. How pretty is that? If I want to manipulate this acid flow, I can at any point. I'm unaffected, right? But if I let it go and wait till 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, there you go. So there's my acid flow auto scroll. Back to the home scene. Let me escape. We're back in Composer. We're done. It's really not that complicated. One of the things we suggest in order for you to get your hands dirty, to have your moment of ooh, which is starting to feel like a really disgusting comment. Under the File menu, I'm opening up the Experiences panel. Anytime you run Composer, you get access to the Experiences panel, which for some reason is off the screen there. And on the Marketplace tab, there's a set of experiences that you can download for free and try to reverse engineer them, right? So these are finished experiences using the basic building blocks of Intuiface. You can download any of these things. I don't know, there's 70, 80 of these puppies. Download any one or more of them that you'd like. See if you can figure out how we built it. Maybe try to put it together yourself. And that's a great way to build your skills. Okay, I want to thank you very much for paying attention to this. I want to thank Geoff for giving me the opportunity to speak about it. I actually have to go. I'm kind of on the clock here. So what I'm going to do is turn it over to Geoff, and he's going to handle the Q&A. It's a live Q&A, but I'm out of here. Thanks, guys.